everyone. Welcome back to the third episode of the Bridge Atlas series. I'm your host, Christine Kim. In this episode, we are going to be discussing Ethereum through the lens of the commons. As a quick note to everyone who's joining us in the middle of the Bridge Atlas series, please do, after listening to this episode, check out the first episode in the series, because that is an episode where me and Tim and Timber, we all tee up this series, and I'll give you a lot of context for forthcoming Bridge Atlas episodes. But for this episode, I want to now introduce our amazing speakers for this discussion on the commons. They are two Summer of Protocols alumni. We have first Trent Van Epps. Hi, Trent.
Hey, thanks for having me.
I'm sorry, I almost said Trent, but that's because I was reading also your last name, and I was like merging them together. But no, it's Trent Van Epps. Hi, Trent. And then we also have Yancey Strickler. Hi, Yancey.
Hey, what's up?
For some of our listeners, they probably already know you guys because Trent, you did the Summer Protocols talk on software commons, and Yancey, you did the one on when the means justify the ends. So hopefully for our listeners, you're not like super new to these people, but in case we have new listeners where it's their first time seeing you guys, I thought it'd be good to start off with a bit of introduction. Please just share a little bit of overview of who you are, what you do, and your research on protocols. Trent, do you want to start off?
Sure. So my background is originally in architecture and design. This is what I went to school for. So I've always been interested in systems. Like at the end of the day, architecture is it's a bunch of systems coming together. And a couple years into that career, I found Ethereum and instantly was sucked in. And so I jumped in head first and have done a bunch of different projects over the years. I work full time in the industry, currently for the Ethereum Foundation, and I spend most of my time on protocol coordination. So this is changes to how the software works or what it might look like when it's operating on the network. So I help to coordinate, software releases, getting different people involved, getting, stakeholder engagement, that whole bucket of activities. And the main thing I spend my time on, which I'm sure we'll talk about, is called Protocol Guild, which is this collective funding endowment for core contributors. We fund about 200 individuals, people who spend their days working on Ethereum, the underlying foundational protocols.
Awesome. Yeah, let's definitely talk about Protocol Guild in this episode. Yancey, can you share also about your background and your area of focus?
Yeah, my name is Yancey Strickler. I'm a writer and an entrepreneur. I've had a winding, twisting career of making projects that make creative people more powerful. Started with Kickstarter, co-founder and former CEO of Kickstarter, a project called The Creative Independent, which publishes daily wisdom every day from an artist. And more recently working on Metalabel, which is a studio that makes group core projects, a platform, financial tools, things in the past on chain, as well as using fiat rails. And also working on a project called Artist Corporations, which is to pass laws to create a new corporate structure specifically designed for creative people. And that is very much a public goods project that is in full swing at the moment. And also working on a project called the Dark Forest Operating System, or DFOS. This is a new Metalabel release that'll be private internets for groups of people to have shared space, shared money, a whole little world they can make together. All of these projects are just sort of things that have come up. There hasn't been a lot of strategic thinking to it. It's just acting on things that are interesting and being able to have great collaborators to do it. And excited to get to talk with y'all today.
Yes, excited for this conversation. And thank you guys for sharing a bit of your guys' backgrounds. I feel like similarly, both of you have fallen into kind of what you're doing now, taking things that may have been perhaps unexpected. But now you guys are here, and Yancey, you're focused on the Creative Commons, and Trent, you're focused on the Ethereum Commons. I feel like there's going to be a lot of parallels to these two types of work, or these two types of industries. Trent, can you kick off our discussion, please, by maybe framing and defining what the area or the loci of the Ethereum Commons is?
Sure, yeah. So for people who maybe aren't familiar, commons are systems for shared production, or at least this is my definition. So you're producing and managing this shared resource over time. A lot of people think about software and maybe they just use it directly, like your iPhone, iOS updates, or any kind of software that you interact with. You may not think directly about it as it being a shared resource that's managed over time. For example, open source software requires a lot of people engaging in it and trade-offs to be weighed, right? There's a governance process that goes into this. And Ethereum is, again, in my frame, it fits very well into this idea of like a digital commons or a shared resource that produces digital goods. And yeah, so this is a frame I've leaned on the past few years and find it really productive to think about it in terms of, how should we think about its governance, but also how should we think about the risks to capture, right? Ideally, we have a set of resources that are, let's say the surplus value or the utility is distributed to as wide a public as possible. And when the governance process or these resources start to get captured over time or influenced by capital actors, this is when you start to lose the magic that makes these shared resources most magical. So that's the general frame. And I think, well, not to preempt Yancey, but I think there are a lot of parallels for like collective governance and some of the work we do around like increasing the legibility of what would otherwise be independent, isolated individual actors. Like you can marshal them together into larger legible forms.
Yeah, Yancey, I mean, is that a definition that is how you might describe what the Creative Commons is? And do you agree that there are like parallels in these two types of commons?
Well, I mean, as I was listening to Trent and trying to think, yeah, what are the creative? And I went to like such a bountiful public goods of like colors and notes and chords and music theory, and there's like an incredible foundation that is either gifted by the universe or has been collectively developed by people. We don't know who made the first G chord or whatever, but like there's somebody, or so, presumably. And so all of that is this amazing tapestry that everyone gets to interact with. What we find ourselves in now is that systems and models built on what's existing are turning all of that into just another free resource, another public good of like generating creative work on demand. So where Creative Commons have always played online has been through rights, it's been through copyright, has been through how do you create a sense of control around a work. What Creative Commons itself has done to create that and to make universal standards that are widely adopted around the web. I mean, those are really hard things to do and are incredibly important because, as Trent said, if we put all standard setting just on commercial actors, there will be a race to the bottom. There will be attempts to, you're just going to lose the amount of love and care it takes to do it well, because to manage anything well is like a tremendous act of daily devotion that is incredibly easy to be lazy about. And then it's just a matter of time until things have degraded. And once they degrade, it's often permanent. So like, I think that that is, those are hard things to create and come by. And I'm interested in I think the what's wonderful about Ethereum is, unlike say the APIs of Web 2, like the Ethereum, the public domain, the public goods, the commons are things that are going to stay around, will, have a resiliency that is independent of a single decision maker. And ultimately, those kinds of things end up being our escape hatches, and we need them. We need them, and yeah.
Yeah, I mean, well, one of the things I think could be a common misconception is that Ethereum kind of like naturally will be able to sustain this commons. But just like the Creative Commons, I think like there needs to be tools, there's needs to be these like innovations that help sustain the commons. And I know, Trent, a lot of your work is around that. Yancey, you had mentioned obviously rights, like as being one of those ways in which people are trying to monetize and have like certain music or like the creation of these creative goods, like be sustainable. You are focused, Yancey, on the tool of also labels. Can you talk a little bit more on why you focused on labels as like kind of the powerful or like the thing that you want to innovate on to keep the Creative Commons going? Like why labels as like a focus?
Well, I think that we're very much, especially creatively, but online, we're in a very kind of single player mindset, and we're encouraged to build our individual following, and that is our sense of self-worth. And in the creative world, it's made us makes you competitive with the people most like you, because like your listener should be my listener, and I was trapped in a loop like that and was trying to think about what are structures that would allow me to be aligned with other creative people, sometimes cooperate, not always, but just like have an alignment of if one of us does well, the other does well, and thought about the history of indie record labels as a model where you often had someone would choose to put themselves out. They would release their own music. And by the act of doing that, other people who did things like them would show up and be like, can you release me too? And suddenly within a year, you have a scene. And the label serves as both a amplifier of something as well as like an invitation to also become a part of it. Oh, you also do things like this, become a part of it. And there's a shared credibility that builds that just puts a glow on everyone. And that if you look through any cultural movement, like really any cultural movement, it is structures like these that end up having a huge amount of influence, because they define what we would now call a brand, but they define a sound, a scene, an aesthetic that helps people understand and helps people like know what else to be into. But those things have disappeared on the internet. And so I became interested in how would you redesign that as a web internet native structure, a group of people have some shared interests, who want to do things together, who may or may not want to make money. And I found that those were not easy things to do very well. And so with Metalabel, we've first building on chain tools, and then ended up making our own versions of these things using fiat and Stripe, of making group treasuries, creating splits, financial splits on transactions, the ability to redirect funds, within your group as you see fit, and just to empower people to have this set of tools. And now we're extending that more into not just a marketplace of selling things, but also into how you act together and how you make decisions in your own private dark forest where you do stuff. But yeah, I really just felt like that notion of how do people align and do things together was just not on the radar of creative people, but was so clearly a different path. And I personally, I'm now a member of a number of groups that do this, the Dark Forest Collective, Hard Art, and it's really fun. it's like, other people share the work with you. You do things together. It's not always on you. You take turns, you have to decide things. Like, it's more interesting. And so I'm just very optimistic that more and more energy is going to go in that direction, because it's just a great counterpoint to, we're all still going to have our channels and voices. Those things don't go away, but you want to be a part of something too. And so I think it's just the sort of the poly identity life that we all live in, online, offline, and all of our many online selves, how it all lines up.
Trent, does that resonate with you? Like, this idea of the label as a really kind of like powerful tool of bringing together like individual work, I guess, to become stronger than like the individual parts, like the sum of it being somehow more sustainable?
Yeah, I mean, I think personally, I approach it from like a very political or social frame of like, there are very clear benefits to why you should do this as a defense mechanism, but I think there's actually very, very practical benefits. For example, like we were talking about independent labels. The benefit of doing that is that you get a very practical, payment, destination for payment. You get representation depending on how the label is structured. You get some representation. You get some connection with a booking agency or marketing, or like help boosting your brand in a way that you couldn't otherwise do. And these are like very practical considerations, like I said, even before we start to think about the political or like the social reality of like, hey, maybe it's nice to be in an environment where you can be inspired by other creatives who are kind of in the same scene as you. There are very, very practical reasons. And so, yeah, coming from my context for Protocol Guild, there are very practical outcomes that result when you bind together these 200 individual core contributors. For example, all of a sudden there's this legibility that you unlock at a greater scale. For example, we ran this pilot a couple of years ago. We're able to raise some money and see how it vested over 1 year, just to experiment with this early version of the mechanism. And then in the years following, we introduced this thing called the 1% pledge, which is, as it sounds, projects commit 1% of their token supply to this group of developers. And when you give something, these packages or these shapes where you can, I always return to the idea of legibility. All of these individuals on their own would never be able to go, or even as part of like their company or their individual team or project, they're never going to be able to go to a large protocol that's launching and they have a token or some revenue and say, hey, you should fund us. Look, we handle this very important niche of the protocol or this specific project. It's like, yeah, that's important, but what's really powerful is representing yourself as part of this larger whole. And to my pleasant surprise, every time there are projects who recognize like, okay, I see the argument you're making. Like, this is 200 people who are doing this key maintenance and stewardship work that wouldn't otherwise be done. And the counterfactual is like, these contributions or this voluntary funding would never happen if we hadn't banded these people together into a larger collective whole. So yeah, the legibility part is really, really powerful. And then the practical outcomes is that. The practical outcome of that is you end up getting, funding that is real impact for these people.
I'm glad that you are talking a little bit about like the practical benefits of what a label like structure can do. Because one of the very just, I don't know, like operational things that the Protocol Guild does deals with capital, deals with pay and increasing the value or like having people like donate and having people put money into what these open source software developers are doing. And Yancey, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but even Metalabel, like you said, has ways of revenue sharing and splitting between different creative people in the same label. These are like tools to kind of help manage capital and hopefully make it easier overall for people who are involved in working on the commons. I want to talk a little bit and discuss your guys' views on how capital changes the dynamics of a common. Trent, you had talked quite a bit in your talk, which we'll link to in the show notes of today's episode if people are interested, about your concerns and kind of like you didn't say like one way or another in that talk whether or not capital really negatively impacts the commons, like makes it more centralized or kind of like makes it private over time and it completely collapses, or capital as kind of like a force for sustaining it and stewarding it well. Have your views kind of on the way capital changes the dynamics of a common, has that changed at all since your talk that you gave for Summer of Protocols?
I mean, probably not too much. The reality is it depends on the form, the context that it's being distributed in. Like as with everything, it depends. So like if you have a large multinational showing up with $100 million, like that's going to be very different. It's going to have very different outcomes or impacts than $100 million that's exclusively managed by a smart contract, and it's the peers decide the allocation. So it does really matter what context or what form it's coming in. That being said, there is a bit of a paradox, right? We have, I'm writing about the risk of capital and like the importance of the commons. But at the end of the day, again, coming to this practical consideration, like people got to pay rent, they got to eat, like there needs to be some way to sustain their work. And so you can't just, we don't live in this, idealized society where people who are doing this key work, they automatically have support for it. So it's definitely a risk, but it's not something that you can just kind of wave away and say, all versions of this are bad, because this is the world we live in, and we need to understand these realities.
Yeah. Any thoughts on that, Yancey, that you want to jump in on regarding how capital influences dynamics in the commons? I feel like you have so much experience experimenting with different levers to manage how capital influences these dynamics, like the artist corporation, your Metalabel that you were talking about. What are your views on kind of like the impact of capital in the commons?
Well, I mean, it can't be underestimated. I don't think it could be overestimated. Money controls pretty completely. But a wise person said to me that we're thinking about, say, a startup, that will always runs out before the money does. And I think if you're thinking about like the desire to do it tends to run out before the money. And if I think about open source projects or any project that I'm a part of that's like a group of people, yes, there is often money is like does it actually happen, or is it like the cheap version or like the great version? But like,
oh, are you guys still there?
I am.
Okay, good. I thought that was me.
I think it's still recording me.
Oh,
no, I think it's still recording me.
Okay.
I'll keep going.
Okay,
yeah,
thank you.
I know mine is a little done. But like when you're in a creative group or working on a project with other people, like money might be this barrier to its existence. But like in reality is the idea interesting or exciting enough that people are willing to put their time into it? And that is like the core, most important currency on any project. Like, will people just do it because it's interesting and it's fun and there's enough social, intellectual, whatever reward to do it? That is at the heart of anything. And then based on the speed of that or the marketing of that or the size of that, money becomes involved. Money that is local to that group of people, great. It can further the group. Money that is external to that social group, that is by necessity looking at it opportunistically, that's probably going to change how things go. And it's hard to know these things up front. Sometimes that external money is the only money because there isn't a lot of capital within that community. And, then the uneasy tension that exists everywhere exists there too. But I think it's like they interact, and it is like that will desire that is the most important thing. And, I think so much about Nadia Asparova's book, Working in Public, about open source software, which is pretty brutal about how much, how much people put onto the people supporting these projects, how overwhelming it gets with bullshit. And what a thankless task it kind of is to manage a thing in the comments, which I have found my few steps through that. Yeah, I absolutely see the wisdom and truth in that. So that's also where money helps, but it's all complicated. There's no easy simple path here. Exactly.
Yeah, if I could add to that, I think one of the things I've found from doing this the past few years is, like, obviously Ethereum started as like this ideological project, like we're going to change the world in this very unique way. And that's what's driven a lot of motivation for the past 10 years, right? This July was the 10-year anniversary of the project. And like, that's still the main motivator for many of the people, right? They want to do this work because it's values aligned. They see some important impact that it's going to have on the world or people that they care about. Or, these intrinsic motivations that are not ever going to be replaced by money. They find it personally challenging. They enjoy the camaraderie of like doing a hard thing. These are, for sure, these take precedence over the funding. Again, but then coming back to, at the end of the day, people got to eat. And so what we want to do with these, what I would love to do for things like Protocol Guild is make it not even a question. Like, yeah, there's funding available for you to just keep doing what brought you here in the first place. Like, avoid it ever being a point of contention. And then, there's like some other nuances about how it's governed and how it's allocated. Like, the goal should not be to introduce more contention around this pot of money or this resource that could sustain you, but instead just like check this box of like, you don't have to worry about this funding. It's going to vest over 4 years. There's certain assurances that we build into the organization. And at the end of the day, the goal is to like, just let people do what they're good at and what they're motivated by, and just to support them in what they're already doing. And so, yeah, I definitely echo some of that you're saying.
I think on another level, crypto and Ethereum in particular being the very first general purpose blockchain, one of the first most popular use cases on Ethereum was ICOs. To be able to so quickly bootstrap a project without having to like start up an entity or like, go to Kickstarter and like, have a page and whatnot, just like create tokens out of thin air and create this community and have some kind of like immediate capital coming your way to fund whatever it is. And the value is directly tied to how much people agree with you. Your token's not going to have value if you what you're creating is not something that other people really find value in at all. So in that sense, I always thought of like one of the primary use cases for crypto, or some of the things that it could change the world with, was creative people and artists, and like helping them, like you said, Trent, like not even be a question of like, do I do this or do that, but like have these like tools to just be able to do what they love and directly access their audience. For open source developers, being able to build protocols and software that can so easily have monetary value because you have the power to create like a token. But Yancey, going back to one of your talks at Summer of Protocols, you really shared a lot about how, in your view and from your experience, the use of crypto wasn't quite fully matured yet for creatives. I want a little bit of an update on this episode. Has your views on crypto being the rails for creative work, has that changed at all since your last talk? And like you said, there's been, like Trent mentioned, there's been developments, and Ethereum has matured over in time, at least.
Yeah. I mean, that was a piece I wrote and ended up talking about called Climbing Out of the Rabbit Hole. When Metalabel, we switched our financial rails over to Stripe and a custom system we built on top of their APIs and marketplace product. I think that the path of crypto and blockchains seems likely to be through stablecoins and through being directly integrated through large banks and large retailers, and just being a part of the overall normal economy, as being sort of the internet rails behind the scenes, and a way to save money on credit card fees and open up a whole set of things that will happen from there. I think artists and creative people will be participants in that system, just like any other consumer. I don't think that creator coins are something that creative people are interested in. To create an outright financial value on yourself, to feel yourself and your work as a liquid asset. I think that's a hard thing for a lot of people to wrap their heads around, because as a creative person, money is on the other side of the room and you're on this side of the room, and you don't go over there and you don't know things about that. Like those are different types of people and different universes that you don't want to associate with, because you're motivated in such a different way. And so I think all of the financial tools that I think, someone in DeFi finds just like really exciting are deeply alienating to a creative person and makes them think, I want nowhere near that shit. Now, there are internet native people, there are NFT artists, there are people who, and probably, people coming up now in like the Robin Hood generation, right? There is probably going to be a different mindset, but I just don't think that is really an artistic person. Not to say that isn't always the case, but I think artistic values shy away from things like that. And yes, that makes it harder to make a living. There's many challenges to that, but that's just part of the reality of being a creative person.
That is fascinating, because now that I think about it, also on the Ethereum side, Protocol Guild wasn't something that like Marius from the Geth team or like Peter from the Geth team like developed themselves. Like Trent, this was, as I understand, it was your idea, but it kind of speaks to like these people that are building the commons. They're not the DeFi experts, the people that are building these tools to like self-monetize their work. They're really not like focused on this at all. And it's kind of like the other people like you, Trent, and you, Yancey, that are focused on like, these other
people.
I
always felt like in my crypto years, I always felt safely within a bubble of other fellow utopian of various stripe nerd, archetypes, of which I felt very comfortable and enjoy the ambition and the optimism, connect with that very much. However, products, people, we're all like born with our souls. We're all born with some sort of original sin, and for all the things that crypto does, its foundation as a easily speculatable internet asset is just like, it's just always going to be there. And for a lot of things, that's going to make it very powerful. For other things, it's going to make it a more uneasy marriage and partnership. And not to say what won't happen in the future, but it's just such a different value set. And if it didn't have interesting technical problems, if it didn't enable interesting social outcomes, I don't think Trent or I would be that interested in this. But maybe a lot of other people still would, because it's like soybeans are boring. This is more interesting to, speculate on, because that crowd exists. But yeah, I just think creative people, that's just not how we're wired.
Trent, has any developer ever who is part of the Protocol Guild, have they ever been like Eigentoken? No. Or, because like they don't, in terms of, they are, when they're signed up for the Protocol Guild, they are getting a sense, or like they're being exposed, whether or not they like it, to the more volatile, like money-driven, capital-driven aspects of this industry, which is a very thriving part of this industry, probably the main part. How has their response been in terms of your interactions with developers?
Yeah. I mean, I have a lot of thoughts on all this. So, like, I think since the very beginning of the project, and like every new wave of the project being Ethereum, and like every new wave of use cases, you see, this insane speculation on a new primitive, whether it's ICOs or DAOs or NFTs, prediction markets, like these things naturally lend themselves to speculation. And this is what typically ends up being leaned into the hardest, because the people who are engaging in like adopting these early implementations or early versions of these tool sets are just hungry for speculative products. And that's kind of just the way it is, like this first wave. And unfortunately, like this is what makes the news, and this is what people get exposed to, like the worst version of all of this stuff, the most exploitative, the worst outcomes of scammers, and whatever, people sells his NFT for however many millions of dollars. Like these are the things, like this hyper financialization is what grabs headlines, and ultimately what makes it to people. And I think core developers have always had this kind of trepidation of, yeah, we believe in the fundamental thing of what we're building, but man, what we're seeing is not great. Like there's always this kind of uneasy relationship with the core motivation and then what they see people using it for. I mean, I guess this applies to any kind of domain where you're releasing work and other people are riffing on it or doing something with it. And you kind of have to accept that there's going to be things that happen that you don't necessarily agree with. I guess the fundamental thing that brings it back full circle is like the core of these ideas, there are really powerful kernels. ICOs are a way to democratize ownership. NFTs, there are tons of models that can make sense. There's probably a version of creator coins that doesn't have the same externalities. Like I've used Zora a few times, and after a few uses, I was like, I have a different relationship with the photos I'm posting on Zora than I do on Instagram, for example, right? It changes your relationship to the thing. I love the Zora team, and they've been grinding on this stuff for many years, but like there is a reality of, I think there's a core of a lot of these things that maybe on longer timeframes we'll start to see some of the externalities or some of the trade-offs worked out in different ways. And hopefully this leads to more productive outcomes. But yeah, I can't disagree. Like the first versions of all this stuff is just like, man, it's so bad. And to your point about core devs, there's a recognition of being proximate to this like hot ball of money all the time. It is a very strange experience, especially when you consider that, for many years, including up to now, like core devs are very undercompensated. So like, not only are you facilitating these crazy markets that are, meme coins and whatever, you're also not seeing any ultimate benefit or upside from it. So like, there's probably a mix of emotions and takeaways that core devs have from this, myself included, right?
Yeah. To bring back one of the things that you said, Yancey, in your prior talk, ends matter, not the means. And yes, it takes iteration. Yes, Ethereum is still an evolving technology. But is the end of Ethereum, and is the ends parallel, and like, is it matching the means? And are there ways in which Ethereum development, um, are there ways that there are like certain code changes or certain like applications or tools that could align Ethereum more with its ends? I think that would be also a good topic of discussion, because, like you said, Trent, there's really cool, interesting projects like Zora happening. I think a lot of the scaling benefits are helping with the fee volatility on Ethereum. But there might be others that I'm curious to know your guys' thoughts on, of what are some like tools or parameters or features that you think would align Ethereum more to its ends, more to the end that it's working towards.
I don't know if I know what
Hard
the ends of
question.
Ethereum
Yeah.
are. I mean, I feel like if I just take the default, like what does the default history of history say? I think it would say that blockchains will succeed as a replacement level technology for internet-based money, which will increasingly be almost all of money. However, I would expect that all of the existing power players, maybe with the exception of credit card companies, will stay the same. And that the notion of it being a revolution and all these other things, the things that most excited people like me, I don't know if any of those things will come to pass. But it will be a very successful new layer of the internet that will make a lot of people very rich. And we'll have all sorts of other secondary things, but I think in general, will not replace the system, but just be a replacement within the system. Feels like to me the path. But the things that it is, I mean, Zora, yeah, probably the best example of put really smart people and empower them with interesting tools and what sort of things can they make, and lots of great expressions and experiences of how you can release and appreciate work through them. But I don't know. I mean, I don't know what part of the crypto dreams we're meant to still be holding out, or like what, is it just network state and that people can secede from the United States so that they don't, have to pay taxes and they can have their own passport? I mean, I think that for a sizable portion of people, I think that is the goal. Like, will that succeed? Possibly. I think it'll be terrible. I think that'll be terrible for the world, the creation of private crypto states. But like, yeah, what is the outcome? I don't know,
Yeah, I can. So I'll give the optimistic pushback, right? I don't think I'd be working on this, and hundreds of other people would be working on it if it were kind of that bleak of an outcome. And I think one of the things I can push back on is we are starting to see real world effects of obviously financialization, like I said earlier. This is the hyper speculation. This is what presents first as like the affordance or the main outcome that people are exposed to, just because it's so insane and it makes a good story and a lot of people get rich, or a small subset get rich, and this is what's reported on. But I think what is the real unlock, and what we've seen is DAOs, right? The first examples of DAOs were the very first one crashed and burned. I was actually a member of the DAO in 2016, and I didn't really understand what was going on, but it was all very exciting. And it's going to take such a long time for us to not only make ones that don't break technically, but also work in like a political and a social sense. And this is, I think, the real unlock for cryptocurrencies. It's not just moving a token from one address to another or facilitating value transfer. It's the governance of this value among mutually distrusting or trusting parties. That's really going to be the huge unlock. And so you mentioned something about the artist corporation that I would love to hear a little bit more on. But one thing I can point to is like we are starting to see real world this has been going on for many years at this point, but the experimentation with DAO first or like on-chain first organizations, for example, Wyoming recently passed some legislation related to this. There's many jurisdictions around the world that are starting to think about like, okay, what are these new things that don't exist so much in the traditional realm of law and LLC and nonprofit, and what are they? How are they different? How can we start to think about them? And I think this is, a bright shining light in the distance that I'm thinking about long term. But yeah, so I'd be curious to hear that. And yeah, one other thought is like, Protocol Guild itself is this nonprofit minded organization. We do have a legal entity, but in the US, we found it hard to actually, in talking with some lawyers and different organizations, they're like, it might be hard, based on everything we know, it might actually be hard for you to get 501c3 status because there are certain restrictions that the government places, right? I understand they want to have rigor, they want to have a high bar for who they award this status to, but it's not as easy. And we could probably have a whole long other conversation around like how different kinds of legislation make co-op-like structures easier or harder. And I think in the US, it's been more common for it to be harder than easier. And so it's interesting to see these new, forward-thinking jurisdictions or states within the US start to explore what are these new things. But yeah, I would love for one day Protocol Guild to have traditional analog organizations that map to this on-chain organization within the US. So right, we can accept tax-deductible benefits, but we're not there yet. And hopefully sometime in the future, this kind of stuff really is motivating for me long term.
Yeah, Yancey, do you want to respond to any of that?
Yeah,
Especially
sure. I mean, I think
around Artist Corporation.
Yeah, I'll just share a couple of things. Like, I think I'm super, like, I think what the corporation was to the 20th century, the social structure that really defined a lot of the world, that's what online native groups are to the 21st century. A dark forest, a group chat. I don't think they need crypto to do that. There's lots of ways to have a treasury and money. Like, the dark forest product will allow you to have a crypto treasury or just a fiat treasury. You can choose what you want to have. But like that form, yeah, extremely powerful, will continue to shape the world. That's how wars are being planned in the White House. That's how new leaders are being elected in Southeast Asia. Like, it is a force that is going to keep continuing.
Group chats. I thought you meant through your product. I was like, whoa.
Yeah. No, through dark forest. Yeah, through dark forest and group chats. Yeah. But that is key infrastructure, social structure of the 21st century. And yeah, with artist corporations, I run a label, the Dark Forest Collective, and we were clearing 6 figures worth of book sales through a thing that we've made together, all of it flowing through the Metalabel system, of 30% going to our shared treasury to fund new work, 70% being split equally between all the authors and just getting a passive royalty when each book was sold a few thousand books that way. And wanted to create a legal structure, default as LLC, but was dissatisfied with some of the things we could do with that. And I had experience watching how public benefit corporations became law, and Kickstarter became one of the first PBCs while I was the CEO, and began working on a project a year and a half ago with a team of lawyers to make a new corporate form called an artist corporation, or an A Corp, that is a variant of an LLC that has a creative purpose, pass-through income, can also fractionalize into shares and equity, can pool together with other A Corps to get access to healthcare, better benefits. And when you create an A Corp, you're asked, is there any IP or work you want to register or hold in here? So it has explicit IP ownership as a part of how it's structured. And it can scale from an individual sole proprietor studio to a collective, a co-op. A co-op could absolutely use an A Corp and just have custom articles of incorporation that lay that out. And so we're working to pass laws. We've started a Artist Corporation Foundation nonprofit. applied for our 501c3 status, haven't gotten it yet. But it's a separate nonprofit that will work to pass laws that will educate people on how to operate and be financially astute at managing your creative project, and create a universe where people can meet each other, become a part of each other's projects, build things together. But it's really trying to make, we'll end up having a web form that's like almost a drop-down menu to choose what type of governance structure you're going to have. But just really try to empower people to have active governance, to approach their work as, they're thinking about the P&L of what they're spending, and they're able to see that they're building value. So it's an interesting project. It's going to take a long time for all of these things to come to pass, but I think we're optimistic that we'll have a first law in the books within the next 2 years, and maybe even next year. We'll see.
Very cool.
One note of additional optimism that I would like to throw into our discussion, and that is this question around what is the end of Ethereum. I really, really think that Ethereum, people have different views on that. And Ethereum in its current form is so malleable in the sense that so much of it is still being developed and evolved, that the voices in the community that are using Ethereum to not really change power structures, but just change it up a little bit, maybe on the face value, and make a ton of money off of it, they obviously have a large say in what Ethereum is becoming now, but so do the voices of creatives or perhaps other stakeholders in the ecosystem that have a different vision of what Ethereum, like they have the power to change some of the means and the features of this protocol to reach that end or to make Ethereum that end. But that time is limited. And I think Ethereum right now is it's barreling towards a future where it's going to be ossified largely. I don't think any technology can be ossified fully, but that in this time, I think it's really critical that the voices of like what people want Ethereum to be, the Ethereum Commons to be, like now is the time that people decide. And yeah, if the corporates win out, like Ethereum will become a corporate chain. But there's this period where I think it's cool. It's like this decentralized project that so many different stakeholders are in, where we need, there's like a battle happening in my view. And so I feel like there's still hope in what the end of Ethereum could become.
Yeah, I mean, to your question earlier about like what's the one feature that could make this easier for creatives or artists, and unfortunately, there's no single feature that's going to just check the box of be good for artists or creatives. Ultimately, it's like these high-level things of scale, make it super cheap to use without compromising on the things that make it unique. So it's permissionless. Anyone can access it. Anybody can run infrastructure with a reasonable level computer and bandwidth connection. Like these are the things that we need to maintain while also accomplishing these scaling and censorship resistant aims or like high level goals that we want to do. So maybe it's I don't have like, there's no silver bullet for any of this stuff, but it's just pushing towards making it accessible to as many people as possible. And amidst all of the, super speculation and nonsense meme coins, there's going to be kernels of projects that are going to take time to bear fruit, and these will be the most interesting outcomes. Maybe that did or did not answer what you're getting at, which is like the end of Ethereum, but I'm very optimistic about that. And I think as I'm rambling, more thoughts are coming. So there's this whole tension between like, Ethereum has this pure core, it's this software project that's open source and it has this set of values. And over time, this competitive pressure or pressure from the outside on the margins of the commons are going to become more and more intense. And it's a question of whether these values can maintain for the long term heading into like this ossification period when it stops changing. So there's an interesting dynamic of how the community thinks about and engages with capital interests or commercial interests, to what degree they can shape the protocol and the specific features that it has, and like the goals that we aim towards. That I think will take a long time to play out. But I think fortunately we do still have like a very strong core of these values motivated people who are interested in making something worthwhile and not just, you know, the back end for JP Morgan or something.
Well
I
said.
felt encouraged during the ETH FUD period, you know, of last year, whenever that
Which
was.
period? It's
Yeah,
always
it's
going.
such a that's a great signal, because I think like if I think from the outside, what do I wish? I wish for this to be infrastructure that's like provably trustworthy, you know, and like you just kind of want it to be a rock that like doesn't change too much, does what it's supposed to do, you know, very clear. Like I, I'm inclined to want like a more conservative versus activist governance of like make the big things incredibly strong and like very well done, and ask whether you should whether you should build into areas that don't touch, you know. I think that if you're just thinking long term, and I think it's the only way that Ethereum should be thinking, and I think that the whole project has been blessed with great long-term thinking from the beginning. It just has to be this dependable infrastructure that is has a different time scale, you know, has more of a tree trunk time scale, because otherwise, because it's all the interval deviations are like where all the problems are. And it's just constant temptation to get into them. But I think if ETH does that and just hold strong to even things that seem from a market perspective unpopular, but say there is real conviction of like, you know what, we've seen this before and this is not going to turn out well, and maybe some of those take 10 years to play out, you know. But I think ultimately, to match what my sense of the vision is, you know, I want it to be something that's immune to that, and that really has its own logic, path, point of view that it feels very confident in. And there aren't a lot of projects on the web that do that, but I think it's really important that some do, and you know, Ethereum feels like one of them.
Yeah, one of the funny criticisms is the meme from Dune where they, you know, our plans are measured in centuries, and like, you know, they're roasting us for being too slow to make certain decisions or keep up with this competing protocol. But I do think there is an unironic celebration of this long-term view of, you know, we want this thing to be here long after we're gone, or at least up until like whatever infrastructure is going to replace it, maybe some AI quantum construction. Like,
yeah, there's no permanent. We're all it's all going to dissolve somewhere at some point.
But until we get there, I think we do have this long-term view of like, you know, that we take this very seriously and consider it a charge or a mission that this is infrastructure that millions of people around the world, hopefully billions one day, are going to look to as, you know, the same way that they treat the internet, of like, this is a part of my life. It's important. It hopefully brings you good things and valuable interactions, and you can trust it to constantly operate in a particular way. And so, yeah, like, you know, we talk about Ethereum as a commons, and the natural commons provide this very wonderful parallel of like, they're close to the earth, but they are shaped by the humans that are near to it and find some productive output from it. And so I think like Ethereum in some ways is, we want it to be this like natural software, ecological software that persists despite the perturbations of commerce and conflict that are happening and erupting all around it. It's this layer that you can depend on, that's built and maintained by humans who care about it. Yeah.
I think that's a perfect note to end off our discussion together. Ambitious is what I would say.
Yeah,
ambitious.
for sure.
But I think there was a lot of clarity too on what the heck the Ethereum Commons is and is building towards. So thank you so much, Yancey and Trent, for discussing the Ethereum Commons with me together on this episode of Bridge Atlas. And thank you, everyone, to everyone who is listening to this episode, wherever you're listening to it. Before we wrap up the episode, I want to just share 3 important housekeeping items for everyone that's listening. The first is, if you like the episode and like the series as a whole, please give the episode a thumbs up and subscribe to the YouTube Summer of Protocols channel. If you want to learn more about anything that was discussed on this episode, Yancey's work, Trent's work, please be sure to check out the show notes of today's episode. You're going to see all the links to where you can find out more about everything we talked about and about protocol studies. And third, last but not least, if you're interested after all of that to just get engaged and start discussing these topics with us and the Summer of Protocols community, please hop into the Summer of Protocols Discord. So yes, thank you again, Yancey and Trent, for the conversation.
Thank you. Have a great weekend.
And thank you to everyone who is listening. We'll talk to you all again in the next episode of Bridge Atlas. Bye, everyone.